morning light came softly through the lace curtains, painting the kitchen in quiet gold, the kind that made everything look gentler than it really was. I was setting out 2 cups for tea, though I only ever drank alone now. Old habits linger like ghosts that refuse to leave even after the house has grown too quiet for them. When I reached for the sugar jar, my hand brushed against the thin groove on my finger, that soft indentation where my wedding ring used to rest. For a moment I froze. Then I looked down. My finger was bare. My heart stumbled. I blinked once, twice, as if my eyes might be lying to me. I always took the ring off before washing dishes, placing it carefully on the ceramic dish beside the sink. The same dish Thomas made for me in the first summer of our marriage, when he was still learning to shape clay and dreams. But now that dish was empty. The sunlight caught the edge of it, too bright, almost mocking. I felt the air leave my chest. I searched the counter, the floor, even the trash bin, my hands trembling with every touch. The ring wasn't there. I sat down slowly, the chair creaking beneath me. My breath came shallow, like my lungs were remembering how to ache. I pressed my hand flat against the table and whispered to no one, "No, not that. Please, not that." When Emily arrived the next day, all bright smiles and expensive perfume, I told her I'd lost it. She laughed a little too easily. "Oh, Mom," she said, "it's just a ring. Maybe it slipped down the drain. Just a ring." I wanted to tell her it wasn't just gold. It was 40 years of mornings, of hands held through storms, of quiet forgiveness after foolish fights. It was the last thing Thomas touched before he died, his thumb brushing over my fingers as he said, "You'll always have me as long as you wear this." But the words stayed caught in my throat, because she looked so happy, so light, as if life had never weighed on her the way it had on me. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind kept rattling the windows, and every creak in the floorboards felt like Thomas walking through the house again. I sat in his old chair, the one with the worn-out arms, clutching my hand as though the ring might somehow reappear if I just remembered hard enough. 2 days later, I found out. I was standing by the window when I overheard Emily on the porch, her voice low and hurried as she spoke on the phone. "It covered almost half the trip," she said. "Yeah, I sold it to the jeweler near Main Street. Mom won't even notice. She never wears it much anymore." I didn't mean to hear it. I wish I hadn't. I stood there, the lace curtain between us, her words slicing through me, softer than a knife but deeper than any wound I'd ever known. She sold it. My daughter, the baby I once held against my chest while humming lullabies through sleepless nights, had sold the ring her father gave me for her honeymoon. To her, it was money. To me, it was memory. I remember my knees giving way as I sank into the armchair. The air in the room changed, heavier, colder. I thought of Thomas, of how he'd laugh when Emily was little, calling her his sunflower girl, because she always turned her face toward the light. And now I wondered, where had that light gone? Later that night, Emily came to sit with me. She was scrolling through her phone, showing me pictures of white beaches and blue skies, smiling couples under soft umbrellas. "Doesn't it look amazing, Mom?" she said. "Ryan booked the resort I always wanted." Her eyes sparkled with joy, but when I looked at her, I didn't see the daughter I'd raised. I saw the woman she'd become, a stranger wearing my child's face. I wanted to ask her, "Didn't you think before you sold it?" Didn't you feel even a moment's pause? But I didn't, because sometimes silence feels safer than truth. Still, in my heart, a quiet question began to echo, one that wouldn't stop repeating through the night. Can love be measured by the shine of gold, or by the weight of what it meant? That night I lit the small lamp beside my bed, the one Thomas bought from a thrift store when we couldn't afford new things, but still wanted our home to feel warm. Its yellow glow made the walls look softer, like memories trying to comfort me. I sat there, turning the silence over in my hands. I thought about the first time Thomas slipped that ring onto my finger. It wasn't in some fancy restaurant or under a chandelier. No, it was in the middle of a rainstorm on the porch of my parents' house. We were 23, both soaked to the bone because he'd biked 5 miles through the rain just to ask if I'd still marry him, even though he'd lost his job at the mill. "Money'll come back," he said, his breath warm and trembling. "But if I lose you, Clara, I'll never find my way again." He didn't even have a box. He just opened his hand, the tiny gold ring resting there, shining faintly under the porch light. I said yes before he could finish the sentence. The ring was simple, just a thin band with one small diamond, barely the size of a teardrop. But to me, it was the world. It wasn't about the gold. It was about the promise behind it, the life we built around it. We were young and broke, but we had laughter. We had dreams that fit in coffee mugs and second-hand furniture. I'd catch Thomas staring at me across the kitchen table sometimes, and he'd grin that slow grin of his and say, "You make everything look like home, Clara." And I did, I think. For a while I really did. That ring saw everything. It saw my hands tremble when I first held Emily in the hospital. Tiny, red-faced and furious at the world. It saw every birthday cake I baked, every bandage I wrapped, every night I stayed up waiting for Thomas to come home from the night shift. It saw love in its rawest, quietest forms, not the kind they put in movies, but the kind that lives in laundry baskets and morning coffee and holding each other through bad news. The night Thomas passed, I remember sitting by his bedside. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and sorrow. He looked at me, pale but calm, and whispered, "You'll be okay, my love. Just remember what this ring means." And I told him, "It means you." He smiled, squeezed my hand, and that was the last thing he ever did. So yes, maybe it was just gold to Emily, but to me, it was everything that ever mattered. After she sold it, I didn't tell her I knew. I couldn't. Because what do you say when the person you love most turns your memories into currency? I tried to remind myself that she didn't mean harm, that she was caught up in the newness of love, in the rush of beginning her own story. Maybe she didn't yet understand how the things we call old aren't worthless, they're sacred. A week later, she came to visit again. She brought flowers, lilies, Thomas's favorite. "For the house," she said brightly, setting them on the counter. I nodded, smiled faintly, but I couldn't help glancing at her hand, her own wedding ring sparkling under the kitchen light. It was large, beautiful, expensive. Ryan had good taste, I'll give him that. "Does it fit well?" I asked softly. She smiled, holding her hand up. "Perfectly. Ryan said he wanted me to have the best." I almost asked her then, "Did you trade mine for this?" But I bit my tongue. Instead, I just nodded again, pretending the lilies didn't smell like guilt. Later that evening, I took her old baby album from the cabinet. I hadn't opened it in years. I flipped through each page, her first steps, her school recitals, her smile missing 2 front teeth. And I kept wondering, where did I go wrong? I gave her everything I could, every ounce of patience, every quiet sacrifice. But somewhere along the way, she learned to measure love in carrots, not kindness. Maybe that's what the world teaches now. That worth is something you can sell, that old things are replaceable, that sentimental is just another word for outdated. That night, I dreamed of Thomas again. He was standing in our old garden, wearing that worn plaid shirt I could never get him to throw away. He smiled at me the way he used to, the kind of smile that could melt away every ache. But then his smile faded. He looked down at my hand, at the empty space where the ring should have been. "Where is it, Clara?" he asked gently. And I woke up crying. The next morning I went to the jewelry store on Main Street, the same one Emily had mentioned on the phone. The bell above the door jingled softly as I stepped inside. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, greeted me. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I swallowed hard. "I think my daughter sold you a ring, a gold band, small diamond, a few weeks ago." He looked uncertain. "I'm not sure I can—" "It had an engraving," I said, my voice trembling. "C.W. and T.W. 1968, please." He hesitated, then disappeared into the back room. When he returned, he was holding a small velvet pouch. He opened it, and there it was. My ring. I felt my knees weaken. The diamond caught the light again, and for a heartbeat, it felt like Thomas was right there beside me, whispering that it was okay, that he knew. "I'm afraid it's already been sold to a private buyer," the clerk said softly. "I can't release it without their permission." I nodded slowly, unable to speak. I left the store and sat on the bench outside. The winter air bit at my skin, but I didn't feel it. I just sat there, staring at the passing cars, wondering how something so small could hold so much of me. Sometimes love fades quietly. Sometimes it's stolen right from your hands. That evening, Emily called. She wanted to tell me about her honeymoon, how the sunsets in Hawaii were just magical. She laughed and said, "You and Dad would have loved it." And for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to say to my daughter, because the man she mentioned, the one she thought I'd still share in those sunsets with, was gone. And now, so was his ring. A few days passed after that phone call, and I carried the weight of it like an invisible stone in my chest. I swept the floors, made my tea, watered the plants, all the little things that fill an old woman's day, but my hands felt empty. It's strange how silence grows heavier when you know what you could say. Every time the phone rang, my heart fluttered with that same old ache, like maybe this time Emily would call not to talk about herself, but to ask, "Mama, are you okay?" But she never did. I kept thinking of what Thomas would have said if he were here. He had a way of cutting through the noise, finding the simple truth in things. "You can't fix love by talking over it, Clara," he used to tell me. "You fix it by listening until the other person runs out of words." So I tried to listen, to the silence, to the air, to my own heart, and all I heard was the echo of what used to be. One afternoon I decided to visit Emily. I hadn't been to her house since the wedding, but I thought maybe seeing her would ease this ache. Maybe I'd find some piece of my daughter I still recognized. When I got there, she opened the door, surprised. Mom, you should have called. I didn't want to bother you, I said, smiling faintly. I was in the neighborhood. She hesitated before letting me in, just a blink, just a flicker, but I saw it. That tiny hesitation that said, my life is different now, and you don't quite fit in it. Her house was beautiful, modern furniture, white walls, gold accents, everything perfectly placed, like a showroom. It smelled of lavender candles and new beginnings. Ryan was out, she said, working late again. So it was just us, mother and daughter, standing in the middle of all that perfection, pretending we still knew each other. I looked around and smiled softly. You've made it lovely, sweetheart. Thanks, she said, fussing with a vase of roses. It took a lot of saving and selling a few things. My heart caught at that word, selling. I wondered if she even realized what it sounded like. I sat down at her spotless table, tracing the grain of the wood with my fingers. I remember when your father built our first table, I said quietly. It was crooked and one leg always wobbled. He said it had character. She laughed politely, but her eyes were distant, already on her phone. I tried again. You know, when he gave me my ring, he said it wasn't much, but it was a promise, one I never took off. She froze for half a second, and I could see it and a quick flicker of guilt. Then she said too quickly, Oh, that old thing. I figured you didn't wear it anymore. I looked at her, not angry, just tired. You didn't ask. Her eyes darted away. Mum, please don't make this a big deal. It was sitting there, and we needed extra money for the trip, and Ryan's card was maxed, and Emily. I said her name softly, the way I did when she was a child and had broken something precious. That ring wasn't gold to me. It was your father's hand in mine. She sighed, rubbing her temple. You always make things so emotional. It's just a ring. That's when I realized there are two kinds of losses in life, the ones that break your heart and the ones that erase who you used to be in someone's eyes. I nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's just a ring now. But inside something shifted. Not anger exactly, just an understanding. The kind that hurts because you know there's no fixing it. She changed the subject quickly, talking about her job, her house, her future. I listened, nodding, trying to find my daughter in her words. But all I heard was distance, the kind that doesn't come from miles, but from time and choices. Before I left, she hugged me lightly, like people do when they're half in a hurry. Love you, Mum, she said. I love you too, I whispered, and I meant it, even through the ache, even through the silence. I still did. On the way home, the sun was setting behind the old oak trees. The light fell across the road in long golden lines, and for a moment it looked like the world itself was saying goodbye. When I got home, I went straight to the little wooden box in my dresser. Inside were the letters Thomas wrote me when he worked night shifts, words smudged by time and tears. I hadn't read them in years, but that night I did. One line caught me. If ever our girl forgets what love looks like, remind her that she was born from it. I cried until the paper blurred, because I wanted so badly to remind her. I wanted to tell her that love isn't something you sell or trade. It's something you keep, even when it costs you everything. The next morning I wrapped the letters back up and placed them under my pillow. Maybe one day when I'm gone, she'll find them. Maybe she'll finally understand what that ring meant. A few weeks later, I got a postcard from Hawaii. The picture showed a sunset over the ocean, the kind Thomas used to dream about seeing one day. On the back, in Emily's handwriting, it said, "Mum, we're having the best time. You'd love it here. No mention of the ring, no apology, just a slice of paradise sent to the wrong address." Still, I put it on the refrigerator, because even when love disappoints you, it's still love. It's still yours, in its own broken way. That night, before bed, I looked at my hand, the empty space where the ring once sat. I pressed my thumb to it, as if tracing the memory of Thomas's touch. And for a moment I swore I could feel it again, warm, real, eternal. I whispered into the dark, "It's okay, Thomas. She doesn't know yet, but one day she will." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, soft and forgiving, and for the first time since it all began, I didn't feel angry anymore, just old and full of love that refused to fade. Weeks turned into months, and the house began to feel too quiet again, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from something missing. I had gotten used to the small sounds of Emily's visits, her laughter in the kitchen, the creak of her heels on the wooden floor. Now it was just me and the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the old walls when the wind shifted. I used to think loneliness had a sound, but it doesn't. It's the absence of one. Sometimes I'd wake up at night thinking I heard Thomas's voice from the hallway, that deep, steady tone saying, "Clara, come back to bed." And for half a second I'd believe it. I'd turn toward the other side of the mattress and then nothing, just cold sheets and the sound of my own breath. That's when I began to realize something important. Grief doesn't end when the person is gone. It ends when the memory starts to fade, and I wasn't ready to let that happen. So I decided to keep him alive the only way I knew how, through the small rituals we used to share. Every morning I brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for him. I'd pour his into his old mug, the one with the chipped rim, and set it on the table beside mine. I'd whisper, "Good morning, love," and imagine him smiling back. Maybe that sounds foolish to some, but to me it was sacred. I also started tending to the rose garden again. Thomas had planted those roses the year Emily was born, said he wanted her to grow up surrounded by beauty. For years after he passed, I couldn't bring myself to care for them. But now, with my hands in the dirt, I felt something shift inside me. The soil was dry, neglected, yet somehow still alive, just like me. As I trimmed the dead branches, I found one stubborn red rose blooming among the thorns. It was imperfect, a little wilted, a little uneven, but it was still beautiful. I stared at it for a long while and whispered, "Thank you." That night I dreamed of Thomas. We were back in our small kitchen, dancing barefoot to a song on the radio. He looked just like he did the day we met, strong, sure, and smiling. He leaned close and said, "Don't let what she did take away what we had." When I woke, tears soaked my pillow, but for once they weren't from pain. They were from understanding. The next day, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years: open the old photo album. The first page was our wedding picture. Me in my mother's lace dress, Thomas in his ill-fitting suit. We looked so young, like we thought the world belonged to us. Page after page, the years unfolded. Birthdays, picnics, Christmas mornings, Emily's first steps. Then there was one photo that stopped me. Emily as a child, maybe 7 or 8, standing by the lake holding my hand. She was laughing, her hair a mess, her cheeks flushed from the wind. I remembered that day vividly. She had found a shiny stone by the shore and said, "Mama, it's prettier than your ring." And I had told her, "Maybe, but this one doesn't carry love in it." I smiled through my tears. Somewhere between then and now, she'd forgotten that lesson. That evening, I went to the attic. There, in an old box, was something I hadn't seen in years, my wedding dress, yellowed by time, fragile as tissue. I lifted it gently, remembering the day I wore it, the promises whispered under the church bells. I sat there for hours, holding that dress, thinking about the way life circles back. How we start out believing love is something that lasts forever. And then one day we realize it's only forever if we keep it alive in our hearts. I thought of Emily again, her laughter, her ambition, her blindness to what truly mattered. And instead of anger, I felt something else. Pity, not the kind that looks down, but the kind that aches for what's lost. She thought she was rich now, surrounded by things, but she didn't know how poor she was, how love, once sold, can't be bought back. Later that week, the phone rang. It was Ryan. His voice was hesitant, kind. "Hi, Mum. Emily told me about the ring. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." My chest tightened. "It wasn't your doing, son." "I know, but I saw the look in your eyes at the wedding. I should have said something then." There was a pause. "She doesn't mean to hurt you, you know. She just doesn't understand yet." "I know," I said softly. "She's young. The world teaches differently now." He sighed. "I'll make sure she learns one day." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The apology didn't fix the hurt, but it soothed something deeper, the knowing that someone still saw me, still cared. That night I wrote a letter, not to Emily, to Thomas. "My dearest," she sold the ring. But I think in her way she believed she was doing what life demanded. Maybe we raised her too gently, taught her to love without teaching her what love costs. But I've decided something, my love. I won't carry this pain like punishment. I'll carry it like proof, proof that we built something worth grieving. I folded the letter and tucked it into the same box with his old ones. Then, for the first time in months, I slept peacefully. The next morning I noticed something strange in the garden. That same red rose, the one I thought was dying, had bloomed wider, brighter than before. I stood there in the soft morning light and whispered, "You were right, Thomas. Some things do come back." And maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting, not replacing, but finding the courage to love again in a world that broke you. Because sometimes the ones who wound us aren't villains. They're just lost souls walking through life without a compass. And if I can forgive the storm, maybe I can teach her to see the rainbow one day. Autumn came quietly that year. The trees turned gold before I even noticed. And one morning the air smelled like wood smoke and old memories. I always loved this season, the one that doesn't ask for attention. It just slips in and lets you remember things you didn't know you still carried. It had been almost 6 months since the wedding, since Emily sold the ring. I had stopped expecting her to call. Silence had become our language, not cruel but cautious, like we were both afraid to open the same wound again. But one morning, as I was sitting by the window sipping my coffee, a small package arrived. No return address, just my name written in that familiar handwriting. Her handwriting. I held it for a long while, my hands trembling the way they used to when I held her as a baby, afraid she might break. Inside was a velvet pouch. My heart skipped, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I opened it slowly, and there it was, my wedding ring, but not the same one. This one was smaller, thinner, almost modest. Clearly not mine, and yet there was something written inside. I squinted through my tears and read the engraving. For what can't be replaced, may it be remembered. Beneath it was a folded note. Her words were shaky, unsure. Mum, I know I can't undo what I did. I thought I understood love because I'd found my own, but now I see that I was standing on what you built, not what I earned. Ryan told me about your roses. He said you still talk to Dad. I think he'd want you to have this, not as a replacement, but as a reminder that love isn't lost, even when we forget its shape. I'm sorry, Mum, truly. If you'll let me, I'd like to come by next Sunday. Maybe we could plant something new together. Love always, Emily. The tears came so fast I couldn't stop them. They weren't angry tears this time, nor even sad. They were the kind that come when a locked door finally creaks open. I looked down at that little ring again, and though it wasn't the one Thomas had given me, I could almost hear his voice whispering, "See," she remembered. That Sunday, Emily came. She didn't wear fancy clothes, no polished heels or perfect hair, just jeans and an old sweater I'd knitted her years ago. When she stepped onto the porch, she hesitated, like she wasn't sure she was welcome. I didn't say anything. I just opened my arms. She broke instantly, that strong, confident daughter of mine who used to argue about everything, now trembling like a child again. She buried her face against my shoulder, and for the first time in so long, I felt her heart beat against mine. "I'm so sorry, Mama," she whispered. "I know, sweetheart," I said softly. "I know." We stood there for what felt like forever, letting the past slip through our arms like sand. After a while, we went out to the garden. She looked around at the roses and smiled faintly. "They're beautiful," she said. "They're survivors," I told her. "They bloom even when they shouldn't." We knelt together by the soil, and she handed me a small packet of seeds. "I brought these," she said, "forget-me-nots." I smiled. A fitting choice. We planted them side by side, her hands trembling, mine steady from years of practice. There was something holy about that moment. No grand apology, no dramatic music, just two women, mother and daughter, planting life where pain once lived. As we finished, she turned to me and asked quietly, "Did you ever hate me, Mom?" I shook my head. "No, darling, I only missed you." She looked down at her hands, covered in dirt, and said, "I didn't understand what that ring meant. Not until I saw how Ryan looked at me when I told him what I'd done. It wasn't about money, it was about respect for what built me, not what I could buy." I smiled sadly. "We all learn late, Emily. That's how life humbles us." The sun was setting by then, painting everything in gold. She stayed for dinner. I made her favorite pot roast, the one she used to beg for as a girl. We talked softly, carefully, about small things. But underneath every word, forgiveness bloomed like those forget-me-nots. When she left that night, she hugged me again. This time it felt different, not rushed, not guilty, just real. I stood on the porch long after her car disappeared down the road. The stars were out, clear and steady. I slipped that little ring onto my finger. It didn't fit perfectly. It was loose, almost falling off. but it felt right somehow, like a new chapter, not a replacement. Then I whispered into the cool night air, "She came back, Thomas. You were right. Love does return, just in different hands." The wind carried my words across the garden, and I swear the roses seemed to move, swaying softly as if they too had heard. In the days that followed, Emily called often, not every day. Life has its pace, but enough. Enough for laughter to return to my kitchen, for my coffee to taste like warmth again. And sometimes when I look at that little ring, I don't see what was lost anymore. I see what was found: understanding, humility, the kind of love that grows slower but roots deeper. Maybe that's what forgiveness really means. Not forgetting what someone did, but choosing to love them anyway, because the story is bigger than the pain. That night, as I sat by the window watching the moonlight spill across the garden, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I whispered softly to myself, to her it was gold. To me it was 40 years of love, but maybe now it's 41. If this story touched your heart, please like and share it with someone who still treasures what can't be replaced. And don't forget to subscribe our channel, Beloved Grandma, where every memory has a heartbeat.